So briefly, the California Environmental Quality Act requires, and that's called CEQA, requires that agencies disclose, identify potential significant environmental impacts for proposed projects. That we identify those, that those be evaluated, and that for those impacts that are determined to be significant, that there's mitigation measures or conditions attached to any action on the project that would reduce those impacts to a less than significant level. So that's kind of the context that we're working within in the California Environmental Quality Act. In order to help jurisdictions make that determination, CEQA allows for a number of methods to be used. One is completion of what's called an initial checklist or an initial study, and it's a series of 65 or 70 different questions, multi-page questionnaire basically, where we use the information that applicants have provided to us to answer those questions in those areas and determine from that whether or not we believe there might be significant environmental impacts. So that's one method. The other CEQA allows for is if the agency knows that there is a lot of controversy or concern from the public. That in and of itself is enough for an agency to determine that an environmental impact report is required. And then thirdly, if there are other avenues of participation or citizen comment, resident comment that has been made. So for this particular project, the Big Wave project, we did have what was called a pre-application major development meeting. That occurred in June of 2006. It was a preliminary kind of context or a preliminary project proposal at that time. All the details had not been solidified. But we took that to the public in June of 2006 and received comments about it. It's called a pre-application major development meeting. It's required for major projects by our zoning ordinance. So we received public comment at that point. And again, it was a more conceptualized project, but there was at least enough detail there to get that initial comment.
Where was that held?
That was at Granada Elementary School, Granada Elementary School.
I'd like to note for the record that that meeting was hijacked by the applicant.
Well, in any event, we did hold it. We got lots of comment from the public. So we used that comment as well as the environmental checklist, that CEQA initial study, and the knowledge that there was a lot of public concern about the project to determine that an EIR, an environmental impact report, was needed. So in December, we took the contract for, we did what's called a request for proposal. We sent out an initial scope to a number of environmental consulting firms, about 10 different firms. We received probably 5 or 6 responses from those firms. We evaluated those and took a contract to the Board of Supervisors in December of 2006 for their approval, which approved an initial scope as well as a cost amount. So that was approved in December of 2006 by the Board of Supervisors. We hired Christopher Joseph and Associates to do the review. In the ensuing 2 years, from 2006 to 2008, late 2006 to 2008, Christopher Joseph and Associates was, with their sub-consultants, were doing a wetlands analysis on the property. And it turned out that the initial analysis that had been done a number of years before needed to be modified. That in fact the wetlands boundary was slightly different than in that initial more preliminary analysis that had been done previously. The applicant submitted additional information from their biologists about that wetlands analysis. Our sub-consultants then took that information, peer-reviewed it, and issued a revised wetlands delineation. So that was occurring between roughly late 2006 to September or so of 2008. As a result of that modified wetlands boundary, the applicant modified their project. They pulled it further away out of that buffer area from the edge of the wetlands. So they made project changes to accommodate that updated analysis. As a result, we held an additional what's called scoping meeting under CEQA in November of 2008. And again, that was held at the Grote Elementary School. And we, again, solicited comments from the public about that revised project in order to modify the scope of work for the environmental impact report. We then took that amended scope to the Board of Supervisors, and they approved the amended analysis and an additional amount of money to pay our consultants to review it in more detail.
I thought the applicant has to pay.
The applicant does have to pay that money. So we put forward a recommendation, we as staff put forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors about the amount of money that it's going to take to pay our consultants to do this analysis. Then the applicant is required to pay that. So the scope over the years, or the contract over the years, has been amended 2 or 3 times, most recently in June of this year, 2009, to accommodate that additional information and project review that's been needed. So in October 22nd, the initial draft EIR was released, and this is the copy of it. There are 2 similar documents that are the technical appendices that accompany this, that have all of the data in it that substantiate the conclusions. So what CEQA requires after a draft EIR is released is that the public has an opportunity to review that information and comment on it. CEQA allows between 45 days and 60 days to review that information. We had released this original document in October, the 22nd, with a 46-day review period, which would have ended on December 7th. We heard from many members of the public that there was concern that with such a lot of information and detailed information, more time would be appreciated. So we've considered that and evaluated it, and as of today, we did decide to extend that review period for another 15 calendar days, so that full 60-day review period will be allotted for the public to review it.
And what's the deadline on that?
Yeah, so that means that the new end of comment period is December 22nd, the close of business day, so 5 p.m. December 22nd. So with that, we will be holding an informational planning commission hearing meeting on November 18th. That has been advertised. There is, and I've made a few copies of this, there's a notice of availability that went out. It does give a brief project description and opportunity for comment, and notifies or lets people know that November 18th is the first opportunity to do that with the Planning Commission. But again, it's informational only. It's not a meeting where the Planning Commission will be making recommendations. They will be asking some questions, making initial comments, hearing from the public that make their comments at that point. But more comments, more detailed comments can be accepted all the way through December 22nd. So it really is an informational exchange at that point. So I brought this to hand out, and then I also brought this modified schedule, which goes over the subsequent hearings that both the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors will be having on this project. Because we have extended the timeline for review by 15 days, that means the tentatively scheduled hearings for the Planning Commission to actually make recommendations on the document and the project will be moved out 2 weeks as well. As well will the board meeting be moved out 2 weeks. So you'll see my handwritten notations in here changing those dates, but this will be updated in a more official capacity by the Planning Commission meeting on November 18th. But I'll hand this out so you'll have it for reference. So, and those hearings, those decision-making hearings are now anticipated to occur on February 24th for the Planning Commission, with a follow-up hearing potentially on March 24th of 2010, and then a hearing on April 27th for the Board of Supervisors. So that's kind of the general